Just a week ago, Washington was rattled. Donald Trump publicly demanded that Intel's CEO, Lip-Bu Tan, resign over alleged China ties. 4 days later, he invited Tan to the White House, then praised the meeting online, calling it very interesting. Intel stock shot up after hours. So, what exactly is going on with America's tech sovereignty? Who is Tan? A semiconductor veteran, former head of Cadence, and a heavyweight investor across Asia's chip ecosystem, with past links to Chinese entities before divesting. In March 2025, he took the helm of Intel, a company once seen as the crown jewel of US innovation, now fighting to stay relevant. Within weeks, he became a political lightning rod. Meanwhile, the Trump administration just cracked open a new channel for US AI tech into China. Export licenses in exchange for a 15% revenue cut from NVIDIA and AMD sales. Beijing, on the other hand, is actively phasing out Intel and AMD chips from all government computers and servers. The grand vision of US tech independence suddenly looks more like a maze of deals and retaliations. If Intel is the cornerstone of the CHIPS Act and TSMC is still in Taiwan, who exactly is America relying on for tech self-reliance? When politics walks into the clean room, every decision, nodes, yields, customers, becomes geopolitical leverage. And in just a matter of days, a CEO can be told to leave, and then publicly celebrated. This isn't just a personnel story. It's a stress test for America's technological sovereignty. To understand why Trump's attack on Intel's CEO hit like a thunderclap, we have to step back and look at the battlefield the company is fighting on. Intel is not just another tech firm. It's the symbol of America's hardware dominance. The company that put Intel Inside into millions of PCs, servers, and data centers worldwide. But over the past decade, it's been on the back foot, losing manufacturing leadership to Taiwan's TSMC, struggling to hit its ambitious chip roadmap, and now trying to reinvent itself as both a designer and a contract manufacturer for others. In 2023, Intel's Foundry Services division posted a staggering $7 billion loss. The company was bleeding market share with advanced chips stuck behind competitors by multiple process nodes. That's when Washington stepped in. Under the CHIPS Act, the Biden administration and later the Trump administration poured billions into Intel's US fabs. Just last year, Intel secured nearly $8 billion in direct federal subsidies to expand cutting-edge manufacturing in Arizona, New Mexico, Ohio, and Oregon. The message was clear. Intel was not just a business, it was a strategic asset. But here's the twist. Despite all the federal money and national security rhetoric, nearly 30% of Intel's 2024 revenue still came from China, including Hong Kong. That dependency is a huge vulnerability, especially when, in early 2024, Beijing announced it would phase out foreign-made chips from all government computers and servers, targeting Intel and AMD first. At the same time, Chinese telecom providers were told to replace foreign semiconductors entirely by 2027. Washington responded by tightening export controls on AI chips. Intel's Gaudi accelerators, NVIDIA's H20, and AMD's newest data center GPUs suddenly required a US export license to be shipped to Chinese customers. On paper, it was a strong stance against Beijing's tech ambitions. But then came the curveball. The Trump administration quietly struck a deal allowing NVIDIA and AMD to sell into China if they paid the US government 15% of the revenue from those sales. So when Lip-Bu Tan, known for his decades of investment across Asia's semiconductor industry, including stints connected to Chinese chipmakers, stepped into Intel's top job, the optics were explosive. To critics, it looked like America's national champion had put a China-linked executive in charge at the very moment the White House was walking a fine line between hardline export controls and lucrative exceptions. This is the political minefield Intel is navigating. Propped up by taxpayer dollars, pressured to lead the charge for US tech independence, yet deeply tied to the very market Washington is trying to fence off. And that's why one presidential post on social media was enough to send shockwaves through Wall Street, Capitol Hill, and Silicon Valley. Let's be blunt. The fight over Lip Bhutan's leadership at Intel is not just about one man. It's about whether America actually has a coherent plan for technological sovereignty, or if we're just pretending while chasing short-term deals. First, let's talk about the hypocrisy at the heart of this situation. On one hand, Washington treats semiconductors as a matter of national security, worth tens of billions in subsidies, export restrictions, and constant political attention. On the other hand, the same Washington just told Nvidia and AMD, sure, you can sell AI chips to China, just cut us in for 15%. If you're Beijing, what message does that send? That America's red lines are negotiable if the check is big enough. Now bring Intel into this picture. This is a company that Washington wants to turn into the homegrown alternative to TSMC, a domestic foundry powerhouse that can design and manufacture the most advanced chips on US soil. But look at the reality. Intel is still years away from matching TSMC's most advanced process nodes. Its much hyped 18A process, which was supposed to be the proof of its comeback, is reportedly struggling with yields in the single digits. That's not just a technical hiccup, it's a potential deal breaker for big customers who can't afford to gamble on late or defective chips. Layer onto that the fact that nearly a third of Intel's revenue comes from China. You cannot just walk away from that market without blowing a hole in the balance sheet. So, when Trump attacks Lip Bhutan for his past connections to Chinese companies, the irony is that Intel's current business model still depends heavily on Chinese customers. If the CEO were to cut those ties tomorrow, the financial fallout would be massive, likely triggering layoffs, project delays, and shareholder panic. And here's the kicker. Lip Bhutan's background is precisely what makes him valuable in the eyes of some investors. He knows how to navigate Asia's semiconductor ecosystem from Taipei to Shenzhen. He has relationships, knowledge of supply chains, and access to capital that could help Intel compete globally. But in today's political climate, those same qualities are seen as liabilities. In a world where the US-China relationship is framed as a zero-sum game, any perceived China link is political dynamite. This is where the CHIPS Act narrative starts to crumble. The law was sold to Americans as a way to secure the country's chip supply chain, free from foreign dependency. But what we're seeing now is that freedom isn't just about building fabs. It's about decoupling from a market that accounts for a huge share of industry demand. And nobody in DC seems to have a real answer for how to do that without crippling the very companies they're trying to protect. Trump's approach, meanwhile, is pure political theater. One day, he's calling for the resignation of a CEO over China ties. 4 days later, after a private meeting, he's all smiles and compliments. That's not a strategy, that's a mood swing. And it sends mixed signals not just to the markets, but to US allies and adversaries alike. If you're sitting in Beijing right now, you're not worried about America's resolve. You're amused at how easily the narrative can shift. The bigger issue here is that Intel's situation exposes the fundamental contradiction in US tech policy. We want to wall off China, but we also want to keep selling to them. We want to dominate advanced manufacturing, but we're years behind and still reliant on foreign suppliers for critical steps in the process. We want to claim moral high ground, but we're cutting revenue-sharing deals that turn national security into a line item on the federal budget. Lip Bhutan is caught in the middle of all of this. He has to deliver on Intel's manufacturing promises to the US government, keep the company financially stable for shareholders, and navigate a geopolitical minefield where any misstep can become a political scandal. And he has to do it while his every move is under the microscope of a former president who thrives on creating chaos. If Intel succeeds under Tan's leadership, it will be despite the politics, not because of them. But if Intel fails, if the 18A process slips further, if customers lose confidence, if Chinese sales collapse without being replaced, the blame will be laid squarely at his feet, regardless of whether it was ever in his control. In other words, this is a no-win situation. And it's a perfect case study of how America's tech sovereignty push is less about coherent strategy and more about reacting to headlines. We throw money at the problem, we punish or praise leaders based on the political wins, and we hope that somehow the market delivers the result we want. But hope is not a strategy. And neither is lurching from one PR stunt to the next. Let's flip this for a moment. Let's pretend the critics are right. Lip-Bu Tan is some sort of secret Trojan horse for Beijing. What's the master plan here? He's going to walk into Intel's clean rooms in Arizona, shut off the EUV scanners, and smuggle the machines out in his carry-on luggage. Maybe swap the wafers with fortune cookies that say your lithography yield will soon improve? That's the absurdity of this whole narrative. The idea that a single CEO could single-handedly give away America's chip dominance ignores one big reality. America doesn't have chip dominance to give away right now. We've been playing catch-up for years, and yet Washington loves a villain. It's much easier to point at a person and say, "There's your problem," than to confront the uncomfortable truth that we're structurally behind. It's like blaming the captain of a ship for the iceberg when the map you gave him is 10 years out of date. Meanwhile, the national security hawks are cheering Trump's tough talk, right up until they remember the 15% deal with Nvidia and AMD. Oh, so Chinese AI labs are too dangerous to buy US chips, unless they pay a finder's fee to the US Treasury? I guess artificial intelligence is less of a threat if it comes with a receipt. And think about the optics from Beijing's perspective. They see Washington blasting Intel's CEO over China ties while openly cashing revenue checks from other chip makers selling into the exact same market. If hypocrisy were a semiconductor, America would be producing at 5 nanometer scale by now. Let's not forget the 18A fiasco. Intel's yield on its next-gen process is reportedly so low, you'd have better odds of hitting blackjack in Vegas than getting a defect-free wafer. That's not a political problem, that's a technical one. But in DC, it's always more fun to frame it as a loyalty test. Do you stand with America or with the other guys? As if physics cares about campaign slogans. Here's where the satire writes itself. Washington is treating semiconductors like their foreign policy trading cards. I'll give you one CEO scandal for 2 export bans, plus a limited edition Nvidia exception. It's not a supply chain strategy, it's a playground swap meet, and the rest of the world is watching us play with our tech sovereignty like it's a hobby. Even Trump's sudden pivot from Lip-Bu Tan must resign to great guy, great meeting feels like a bad reality TV plot twist. One episode ends with a dramatic firing, the next opens with a handshake and a photo op. And the audience? That's us. We keep tuning in, half expecting the script to make sense, and it never does. Here's the punchline. If the US really wants to secure its chip supply, it has to accept some hard truths. We can't just demonize global experience when it suits the narrative and then quietly rely on those same networks to keep the lights on. We can't scream decouple while cutting side deals that undercut the whole message. And we can't pretend that throwing subsidies at a company magically solves the years-long gap in manufacturing technology. But satire aside, the most dangerous thing here isn't China. It's complacency. The belief that political theater equals strategic action. That calling out a CEO is the same as fixing a supply chain. That's how you wake up in 2030 still chasing the leader, still negotiating from a position of weakness, and still wondering why tech sovereignty was always just out of reach. Here's the bottom line. The battle over Lip-Bu Tan's leadership isn't just about one CEO, it's a mirror reflecting America's messy, contradictory approach to tech sovereignty. We talk about independence like it's a flag we can just plant in the ground. But sovereignty in semiconductors isn't symbolic. It's technical, it's economic, and it's brutally competitive. If Intel can't fix its 18A yield, if it can't close the gap with TSMC and Samsung, no amount of political chest thumping will matter. And if Washington keeps sending mixed signals, slamming one company over China ties, while quietly greenlighting billion-dollar sales to China from another, the world will see the hypocrisy for what it is, a country that wants to win but can't decide how. The next 5 years will decide whether the US is a leader in chip making or just a very loud customer. It will depend on whether we prioritize engineering over ego, long-term planning over short-term optics, and actual strategy over Twitter theatrics. For all the noise around Lip Bhutan, the truth is that the scoreboard will come down to results. Can Intel deliver on time, at scale, and without being dependent on the very market we claim to fear? If yes, he'll be a hero, whether Trump likes it or not. If no, he'll be the scapegoat in a story that was doomed from the start. And for you watching right now, this isn't just about chips or politics or one CEO. It's about whether America can get out of its own way. If you think this conversation matters, share this video, drop your thoughts in the comments, and let's talk about what tech sovereignty really means before it's too late.